And I've got to take a picture of what will become a classic. Committed. Thank you for that. So a funny thing happened on the way to the conference. The night before, the day of my presentation, a new book came out. And this new book basically answered many of the questions I had and most of the paper I was going to present. So I hope the revision that I donated some of my sick time to create will at least give you one or two thoughts to ponder that would be worthwhile for your hanging out so long to listen to this presentation. So without further ado, here goes. So for my right brain friends or to my left brain friends, this imagery dedicated to the biggest problem we have in business globally, and that is the lack of engagement of employees in the workplace and in their work. So the top two lines, if you can make out the happy people, those are the engaged, and according to several studies, most notably perhaps Gallup, only 30-something% in the best countries, most engaged workforces, are engaged in their work. That is, they take initiative, they're concerned, they're active, they're learners, they're contributors, they're inspired. That leaves 70% of your colleagues that are not engaged. But the worst part is those who are actively disengaged. And that is the scariest number I've seen. 17.5% of your colleagues are actively, not only do they hate their job, they want to make everyone else miserable. And so this is a very disturbing fact of life. A second piece of data to point out this problem we're having is that 44% of millennials intend to leave their current employer within 2 years. And if you take the time span out to 5 years, it gets even worse. So that we're doing something wrong in our businesses. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised after 250 years of a basic business model proposed, I guess, in the early days of capitalism, and because of the perpetuation of very convenient bureaucratic models which have been with us since Mesopotamia and ancient China and ancient India. I suppose because of the convenience they provided and the direction and efficiency, I suppose we really can't blame ourselves for not quickly changing the model and transforming our experiences in the workplace. But at least the GNH movement, which is part of a long tradition, I might add, of humanistic thinking regarding management and business, I suppose that having this small, dedicated army of committed individuals ready to take on that good fight for the next generation, it's going to be a motivational piece for us, and it'll make a difference, I believe, in our organizational lives. I don't say just business, I say organizational lives, because all organizations are pretty much modeled on the same mindset. We hear of the exceptions, we've heard of some today, they're marvelous. I was so inspired this morning, and it feels like last week, when the Prime Minister of a country makes a speech like that, having also graduated from the Harvard Business School, I know I'm in Shangri-La. And then, of course, to hear from the Vice President of the World Bank talk about this incredible experience in Japan. It was perhaps the greatest opening to a business conference I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot of them. So I have basically a suggestion to look at GNH and what we do as a movement to take two different roads. One, I suppose, I love this. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. This remarkable quote from Yogi Berra, an American coach, really says it all for us. Because in effect, I'm going to propose two different strategies, but it's not one or the other, it really is both. And I'm sure there's someone among us who will choose one over the other. The first approach, very simple, to advocate and educate about GNH, and I'm just so impressed with the progress that Bhutan has made since particularly 2012, when the United Nations finally recognized the wisdom in the gross national happiness concept, and recognized it in a very significant way that made its way into the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that was a great starting point. And all of a sudden, after those 40 years of pounding on the door, being accepted triggered a series of events that have now spread fast and wide globally. And countries are now appointing ministers of happiness, as in the UAE. They're entertaining quality of life studies. They're making an effort to make a difference in the public sector, not so much in the business sector. So this is the first approach. Second approach is to support experimentation. And being an international conference, there are examples we can point to around the world of organizations and businesses that are living the dream, as it were. We could look, for example, to Brazil, Semco. Perhaps you know Ricardo Semler, who inherited a business. He had trouble working in the old paternalistic, hierarchical environment. Almost had a life-threatening, well, he did have a life-threatening heart condition before he was 40. And his doctor said, either you change the way you work or you're not going to see 40. And of course, what he did was totally turn the model upside down and, unbeknownst to him, created a GNH-style environment in his organization, which today serves as an excellent example still of what's possible. And I love those case studies of what's possible, so we can all aspire to emulate them and to realize it can happen, it can work. Another might be the last remaining kibbutz in Israel. If you're familiar with the kibbutz model, you'll know it's a very cooperative, communal environment where people live and work together. In this particular case, in this kibbutz called Samar, it's a date plantation, and it's an anarchic structure. And the anarchic model simply reinforces the idea that everybody in the kibbutz will get what they want out of it. And there is no need for the hierarchies and the controls and the systems handbooks and the process handbooks that typical organizations have. There's no hierarchy. I don't know if you can actually get your head around this concept, but you determine exactly when you're going to work, what you're going to do, how much you'll get paid, and you have an open treasury to dip into to satisfy your needs. There are two understandings. I don't know how we can call them rules, perhaps, but there are two understandings. The individual can do anything he or she wants to do as long as it doesn't hurt the organization, the collective, the kibbutz. And the kibbutz can jointly do anything it determines it needs to do as a collective, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Think about that, and you'll see that the challenge of achieving those two understandings is enormous. But they are profitable, successful, and it appears to be a beam of light that we can be drawn to for lessons. Those are just two examples. There are many. We heard one this morning. It raises questions about how to instill such things in a larger environment, especially in a conventional competitive environment, but we can talk about those. So let's go back to the conventional organizations for a minute and look at why they are impenetrable century after century in terms of creating the kinds of relationships and purposes that we've been talking about. So in the first case, with this bureaucratic, rule-bound, power-controlled environment, we're saying contradictory things to people and making them basically crazy-making places. Because what we say in organizations is cooperate with each other. And what we actually design into those organizations is a competitiveness between colleagues. Because there are limited goodies to be passed around. Limited promotions, limited merit awards, limited assignments. And so on the one hand, we're saying cooperate, let's build teams, let's have organizational spirit, let's have loyalty to our profits objective. We're also saying there's only so much that we can give away, and if you're obedient, do what we ask you to do, and are better than your colleague, you will be the winner. So we have this zero-sum game of winners and losers. At the same time, we're telling our leaders to be servant leaders, that is, to keep the interests of the group ahead of their own. That is, to be more coach-like, be inspiring, get people focused on their job, move ahead organizationally. And yet what we have created in most cases, subtle as it may be, in wonderful places to work, it's a very clear domination-subordination relationship, where each rank above is that much better than, by definition, that rank below. And a boss, no matter how limited, intellectually, experientially, what have you, is always right. Where that is not the case, the idea of it still remains. And so the structure itself encourages people either to become quite cynical or to buy the party line until they do. And that is when they rise to that level where they are crushed by the organization or hurt by it in some way, that their eyes open to the reality of the design of that organization to keep people subordinate. So there's a lot more to it, obviously, but this is the essence of these relationships, the boss-subordinate and the subordinate to subordinate, or colleague to colleague. And so looking to these companies, these global monsters, to adopt GNH, it's worthy of your effort if you're so committed. And I salute you. And they may also be responsive at various levels. Their subdivisions might, some leader, some visionary might think, oh, look, listen to this, it sounds terrific, and it might really inspire the work we need to get done. And actually invite you to participate and to talk about this concept. And then a week later, they're on to something else. I had the unfortunate experience after I published a book called The Living Organization, Building Communities at Work. I had the unfortunate experience of having a book talk and a person from Hewlett-Packard, that was one of the finest places in the world to work, actually say to me, I tried what you said in chapter 9. That is, I suggested, if you want to create this environment, invite your colleagues to lunch and start there. Have a dialogue, create an agenda, keep networking, present your community of practice, as Anna suggested earlier. Develop that consciousness and then take it from there.
Last
he said
2
the
minutes.
first time...
2 minutes, two more minutes.
Are you kidding?
Yes.
He said the first time he asked the people to do that with him at lunch, the HR department, that the stewards of the HP way told him if he did it, he'd be fired. And so that opened my eyes about large organizational transformations on good ideas. Okay, 2 minutes. What can I tell you? If you look at the basic business model, especially in the United States today, Welcome to the Borg, a Star Trek characterization of where we're headed. Meaning that AI, big data, robotics will merge with biology until the biology is no longer necessary, and then we are just into a different evolutionary form. And so that's that one model. So the underlying challenge in facing organizations that have these commands to follow, that is to go to zero cost, zero waste, which environmentalists might appreciate, zero errors, instantaneousness of plan to execution, eventually zero employees. But until then, employees would have 100% of their mind occupied by work and the organization, and obviously it goes on. This is the drive. This is it. Every year we got to have more. Growth is endless, and as has been pointed out already, that's not only foolish, it's impossible. And so, nevertheless, that's what's driving them. Emergent organizations, I believe, is where we need to spend time. So, quickly, this is an organizational structure where the purpose is the driver, and the structure is created to facilitate that achievement collectively, working together. And there are organizations that represent this. Somebody mentioned an organization in the Netherlands of Visiting Nurses Association, which is an excellent example of this sort of behavior. So, thus, read the book. It's great, but I have some considerations. Obviously, I can't go through all of these today because of my time limitations, but I will be following up in the article about what I consider the limitations of what we are facing here. The main one being there's still the shadow of bureaucracy running throughout, and there still is the sense that when we talk about workers, we're not talking about managers. I'm not sure, that's not that clear, but when you say investors, managers, workers, those might be roles in the same organization, but I see them, and I see the GNH movement eventually creating partners, shared ownership, and some other concepts that don't distinguish between classes of people, but roles, which is a very different idea that we're familiar with. So I think I'm going to have to leave these considerations. And I'm sorry I mismanaged my time, but I would support my last comment is that Anna talked about a community of practice. I would really hope that the Center for Bhutan Studies in GNH will create this information exchange on a monthly basis, so we know what all of our efforts are doing around the world, so we can help each other and we can reference each other and keep that conversation going, especially as it is needed and not when the conference is held. So sorry there's no questions, I guess, at this point, but maybe we can talk about those a little later. Thank you.